which means it was clear Jesus wanted something for us when it came to money. What is that?
Understanding where you are informs your behavior.
Yeah.
It does. It puts perimeters around your behavior. You will make better decisions and live with fewer regrets if the only thing you did was have a good "you are here."
What's up, North Point? Thank you for tuning in. I'm Jeremy. This is my good friend, Matt. And if you were not aware already, today is Twin Day.
That's right, y'all. And a lot of times, me and Jeremy, we get mistaken for each other because apparently we look alike. I maybe can't see this from this angle because I'm about a foot taller than Jeremy. And there's actually a lot of differences between us. We may be twins by looking alike, but in fact, I'm actually allowed to ride the rides at Six Flags. I don't know if you are. I'm the transit director here at North Point, and a lot of times Jeremy gets mistaken for middle schoolers. The beard helps most people, but I don't know if the beard actually helps you. Whoa, we can bring that up. We don't need to see that. We can bring that up. We can bring that up. We can bring that up. We don't need to see that.
Anyways, our goal here is to inspire people to follow Jesus, and everything that we do is centered around that. If you want to discover more, click connect with us below or in the chat. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, all the things.
And at the end of the day, we know that we can all grow by engaging in content, but the best way is to do life alongside with other people, which is why today we are launching Meetups, which is an opportunity to connect with people around a common interest. And there are so many different types of meetups available to you guys starting right now.
And the goal of all of this is really to give each of us, especially in this time when people can feel isolated, a way to be connected and do life with others and grow alongside other people. We've seen so many stories of this in our community and at North Point. In fact, we want to share one with you. These people are actually the owners of the store behind us called Scoop and Score. It's a local ice cream and coffee shop on Vista Ridge Boulevard. It's owned by Alex and Angie Ellis. They have an amazing story of community, so check this out.
So my name's Alex. This is my wife, Angie. We have 3 kids and a little boy on the way. We own the ice cream parlor Scoop and Score in Cedar Park. We've been going to North Point for probably 5 years or so.
Right, yeah.
Just got involved in community groups within the last year. This is our first year doing it. Our idea of community before is just kind of like just your circle of people that you might not necessarily know on a deeper level, but you see them day to day, you know their names, you might know their kids' names, but you're not no idea like what their story is or anything like that.
Before we joined group, we would go to church all the time, but it was kind of like, okay, we went, we listened to the sermon, and now we run to the car. Like, when we first moved here, we started having kids right away, so we never got into meeting a bunch of people because we were just busy.
Yeah, so what made me join groups was, I think after like Sermon 85 about joining groups, I was like, it's time to join groups. And Angie had been pushing me a lot to take the step and leap, and I'm glad we did it. It's helped our faith grow. I think we've met people that we'll probably be lifelong friends with, for sure. Back in February, I got a call like early in the morning that our store had been broken into. It was just like a crazy time. I guess I was just never expecting like an ice cream shop to ever get broken into. So I went down there, kind of checked out everything. We had some damage to the store. We had to close down for a day. Immediately, once I sent out a text message and kind of put it on social media, our small group was like, well, when you guys open the next day, let's get all of our families together and we're gonna go all have ice cream to support you guys. Everybody in our small group was tagging into like other groups that they were in on Facebook to tell people about it to come support us. So it was very impactful that they decided to support us in that way.
They've been there for us, like multiple things, like different family problems that we've run into and stuff. Like they've always showed up, and it's not just like, okay, we did our weekly meeting or whatever, and now we're done or whatever. Like they're always there, and they were some of the first people that we told that we were pregnant, and we announced it to them countless times where there's like kind of been big moments in our lives that they've just always been there for. And to me, like community, whereas before it was, just like the people you know or the people you're around, now it's kind of more like the connections that you make.
My group experience has made my faith deeper and taught me the importance of having people around you that can be there in the good times and the bad times. I can see why now, after all the things we've been through this last year, why it's important to have like a community group involvement.
Community is so powerful and so important in our life. And so if you're watching and you've been longing for something like that, you've been missing people, looking for ways to connect and really just make church more personal, go to mpaustin.com/meetups to sign up for meetups this week.
And honestly, guys, we just want to say thank you to those of you who give to make meetups and all of this content and everything happening here with kids, students, and adults possible. Stories like the Ellis's, people growing in their faith through community, happen today because of you. So thank you for your generosity in partnering with the vision and mission of North Point. If you haven't given before and you'd like to partner with us, just go to mpaustin.com/give.
Now today, we're gonna jump in and wrap up this series that we've been in for the past couple weeks called Fresh Start. We're gonna be with Buck, our lead pastor, who's gonna be interviewing a good friend of ours named Wes Young on what it looks like to take a fresh start in one of the areas with the greatest pull on our hearts. With that being said, here is Buck and Wes.
One of the most emotionally charged topics we could talk about, especially in church, is money. And today, we're going to have a conversation about money. Now, as you hear that, perhaps there's something inside of you that wants to tune this out or turn it off and go into the garage or do something different. But before you do that, I want you to think about, what is that? And why is that? Why do we want to tune out the conversations about money? And why is it when it comes to marriage or conversations about, parenting and relationships and God and eternity, those things are far more important than money. We're willing to tune into those, but when it comes to money, we want to tune out. I mean, what is that? And why is that? And when it comes to Jesus Christ, why did he talk about money more than any other practical topic? And what's fascinating about Jesus is not one time did he ever ask for money, so he wasn't trying to get our money, which means it was clear Jesus wanted something for us when it came to money. What is that? Well, today we're going to have a conversation all about those things. And in fact, today, if you're tuning in and you're a Christian or maybe you're not a Christian, you've got a lot of questions about Jesus or God, or today, wherever you're at on the financial spectrum, we're going to have a conversation how to take a practical step and experience a fresh start financially and honestly begin to experience some financial freedom. So that's where we're going. Now, today, to help with this conversation, I want to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Wes Young. So, Wes, welcome.
Hey, Buck. Thank you for having me. I've been looking so forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Well, Wes, here's the deal. I thought, you were probably going to wear your cowboy boots today.
That's a good guess.
So, getting ready this morning, I was thinking, you know what? I should wear my cowboy boots.
I love
because thinking about, my name's Buck, your name's Wes, we're from Texas. We should wear cowboy boots.
If we could sing and play guitar, we could be a band, I think.
I think so. It may not be very good, but
No.
we would at least try it, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, hey, thanks so much for being here. And guys, you may actually recognize Wes because I think you taught, 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago?
Yep.
Something like that?
Feels like just the other day.
Yeah, I know. I know. And you've taught here several times over the last, several years.
Sure.
So again, thank you for that, because every time you teach, it allows me to do one of two things: either work on North Point, because I'm working in the organization, working in a lot of things. And when you're teaching, I can work on some strategic things, or it allows Jill and I and our boys to go on vacation. So on behalf of Jill and I and our boys, thank you again for your willingness to do that.
My pleasure. And just so you know, every time that I prepare to do one of those, I just want to thank you for how you do it every single week, because I don't know how you pull that off.
Well, who knows? It's you just pray and things happen, right?
That's great.
So listen, the reason I ask you to join this conversation is because I know you think about money pretty much all day long. You may even dream about money. You study money. You read books about money. You've actually written a book about money. I mean, money's a big part of your life, and the reason why is because that's your profession. And you talk to people about money, consult with money. So I'm just curious, can you talk a little bit about what you do and what got you into that profession?
Yeah, you bet. It's pretty simple. I mean, you know how most of us tend to run out of time and money before we run out of all the ideas and opportunities we could go pursue?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We help people with that. I mean, that's what our team does. We work primarily in the financial planning field and work with people that own businesses and real estate and some corporate executives to really help them identify and pursue their best financial opportunities.
Awesome. So in just kind of the practical world, what does that look like for us?
Yeah, real straightforward. We start by asking a whole lot of questions about where you are from a financial standpoint, about all the things that you care about in the future that you're trying to crystallize and create. Because once we understand that, we can have some great, very specific dialogue around all the areas of planning we specialize in that may be able to add to your profitability and quality of life in the most relevant way.
Yeah, well, that's very cool because I think that's ultimately what we want, a little bit more profit and enjoyment in life and a little bit more money. So thank you for doing that. And I know if somebody's interested in contacting your organization, I think we're going to put Wes's company website up and an email to contact Wes directly. So if that's something you'd like to do, there you go. So listen, real quick, getting in the money world, I don't know what like percentages of people who are actually, that's their career, but I would imagine there had to be something that like was a catalyst or spurred you to make that decision in your life.
Yeah, and looking back, there absolutely was like a defining moment. I wouldn't recognize it for years and years to come, but it actually happened when I was about 15 years old. And I remember sitting in my dad's truck, and he and I were having an argument, which was for my family very unusual because I have incredible parents, great mom and dad. My dad is one of my biggest mentors still to this day.
Yeah, and I've met your dad before. He's amazing.
Yeah, and looks a little like Kenny Rogers.
He does. He's got the cool like grayish hair
he does,
going.
He does. And we talked about everything in our house, and really nothing was off limits except for one topic, and it was money. And, when I'd ask him, hey, how much do we make? And I didn't realize I'd be asking that question for the rest of my life to people all the time. How much do you make? And they would just immediately shut down. There was a weird kind of tension around it. And, questions about money or things, hey, could we have some money to do this? It was a real tense kind of thing. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with how they were raised. Just in that time, there wasn't a lot of communication about money. But the bigger thing that day in the truck kind of emerged because I remember sitting there being very frustrated and telling my dad, I said, Dad, I'm not even going to know what a good living is because I have no idea what you guys make. I don't know what that is, what it isn't. You guys won't talk about it.
Right.
And the atmosphere changed.
And that was such an honest thing to say to your dad.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, such a authentic, we could have a great relationship. But that moment, the atmosphere moved from argument to almost one of heaviness and sadness. And I remember my dad just in a true honest moment looking back and saying, I wish I knew what to tell you. Because Wes, what I can tell you is that we struggle. And he said, and we struggle, we feel financial pressure, we feel financial tension, and it doesn't matter how much I make, because we did really well. My dad made a lot of money, and he said, we make more and more, but we're right to the edge. There is no margin, and there's so many things I'd love to go and do, but it's like all this tension, and when we talk about it, there can be fighting and arguing, and he said, and we just don't have a lot of peace there. So I wish I could tell you some things about money to not have you go down that road. But you know what he did? Indirectly just told me some things about money because in that moment, I knew I got to get my hand around this. I want to figure this out because it shouldn't have to be this way. And I remember going and from that point on just being a voracious studier around economics and behavioral economics and reading about the lives of a lot of really successful and then not so successful folks and having a ton of conversations with the people that were in my atmosphere. And what I found was my mom and dad weren't alone. In fact, they, I believe, were in the majority after all these conversations. And even people, ironically, that had a lot of money, what they didn't often have is peace along with that money. And so as I began to look at both sides of these people that appeared to be in different economic conditions, why wasn't peace present and where did that come from? And so it just began my search for that and ultimately led me to really studying the life of Jesus and what he had to say about money, and ultimately today leads me to doing what we do every single day with all of our clients, trying to get them to that place of not just financial health but financial peace as well.
That's amazing. And I love that. And I love that your motivation is really for people to experience peace. I mean, you saw that in your parents' life and you were like, man, I just wish my parents had some peace and our home had some peace around that subject. And that's your motivation.
Absolutely.
And that's a cool thing. Well, thanks so much for sharing that. I had no idea. So, yeah, there's always a story behind the story, you know, and it's fun to see that. So here's the deal. I mentioned something earlier, and I'm just curious. I'd love to get your opinion. So at the beginning, I was talking about, you know, money and tension, and it's emotionally charged topic, and especially in church. I'm just curious, like, why do you think that is? I mean, you talk to a lot of people about money. What creates that tension, and what's that all about?
Yeah, I think there's primarily, especially when it comes to church, a couple reasons. And I think the first reason's, you know, it's kind of funny. I have a really good friend of mine who's a principal at a school. And one of the things he always talks about, he said, Wes, if I'm not careful, you know, we've got a lot of good kids in our school, but if I'm not careful in my role, I happen to meet all the bad ones, and I can think all of them are like them. And
Right.
so I crack up because, you know, the thing is, there's a lot of great churches, Buck, and a lot of great stewardship that's going on there, things that are getting done in the community. I mean,
Absolutely.
lots of progress being made. But those don't make the news. You know, who makes the news are the ones that go bankrupt or misappropriate funds or
Right.
some scandal, you know. And I don't know that is really subject to change anytime soon, just because that's more popular on the news than the other.
Yeah.
But I think it's a real reason. But I don't think it's the biggest reason. And if I'm honest, I think the biggest reason is in how sometimes it gets communicated, or maybe in a better way to say it, it gets miscommunicated or communicated in almost an unusable way
Right.
about God and money. And generally what I hear, and I believe this is from well-meaning people,
Sure.
you can either put your faith and your trust and your hope and your peace in God, or you can put your faith and your hope and your trust and your peace in money. So clearly, if you're trying to pass the test, which one box were you supposed to check, right?
Right.
Well, I got to do this. But think about this. We spend 40 to 50, maybe 60 hours a week working to get money. We have to pay bills. We have mortgages out there. We're supporting children and buying cars and doing all the things we have to do, maybe investing money. We spend a lot of time and attention on money. And if not careful, is my weight gravitating towards that? Because frankly, but money is the fuel, right? It's the fuel that lets us do good things. It's the fuel
Absolutely.
that lets us do good things and help people. And so I think a better way to look at it is just money can create a lot of meaning in your life, but just understanding it's not the meaning to life. And money is a very good tool, but just understanding it's a horrible, horrible master.
That's good.
But it doesn't mean you don't focus on being really good with the tool.
Right.
Because nothing that you will read in the New Testament that Jesus spoke about would ever argue that he didn't care about you understanding how to use that tool really, really well.
Right.
He just didn't want it to be your master.
I love that. I think that's so important to say. And, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking about the whole concept of, you know, security. And I mean, money is a legitimate security. It's the real deal. It provides that, but it's just not our ultimate security. And I think that's what Jesus was really trying to communicate. Your ultimate security is your Heavenly Father.
You bet.
And I love that that you brought that up, because I do think that leads to a lot of confusion when it comes to money. And the other thing I think you said, and I experienced this too, is, you know, there's a reputation with the church and money. And you know, before I moved into kind of, you know, the church world, if you will, and started North Point with an incredible group of people, I worked at Dell for about 10 years. And I would have lots of conversations with people, and they would be like, oh yeah, the church just wants your money. And, you know, or did you hear about that church and the embezzlement? And those are real things.
Yeah.
And I think we really need to be accountable as a result of that. But I remember starting North Point, one of the things we were thinking about is how do we create checks and balances? So that simply just isn't our story. And one of the things we did early on is we created a team called a stewardship team. And you were part of the stewardship team.
I am, very familiar.
Yeah, thank you for being part of that. But it's really cool because this team meets once a month. They look at all the money that comes in, not individuals and what they give, but just the lump sum. And they look at our budget, and they see how every single dollar is spent. And we have our budget, we have our actuals, we have P&Ls, we have our cash flow. You guys see all of that. And then, you know, the team's made up of CEOs and CFOs and department leads. People are familiar with how to, you know, risk management and how to manage money and all that kind of stuff. And you guys ask us a ton of questions.
Yes.
And I love that because it's a great check and balance. And the thing for me, which is really empowering, is when I come to you guys and I ask you to invest in our vision, invest in our mission, one of the reasons I can have confidence and say, hey, when you invest in our vision and mission here at North Point, it actually goes to that, is because of the team.
Yeah.
And because I know that there's oversight. I know that there's a level of checks and balances here at North Point. And I just love that. So again, thank you for serving in that role as well.
Absolutely.
You serve all over, which is awesome. So here's the deal. Talking about money and what I talked about earlier is that Jesus talked about it all the time. In fact, if you look at the letters about the life of Jesus, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 1 out of every 10 verses talks about money. That's a lot. And then a third of all Jesus's parables had something to do with money. And so, again, Jesus could have talked about so many other things, which he did, but he talked about money all the time. And as I was thinking about our conversation today and just all the things Jesus had to say, I think the most fascinating thing he said about money, at least to me, is where he said in Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Yeah.
And just to kind of contextualize that, when he said treasure, that literally means money.
Yeah.
And he says, where your money is, there your heart will also be. And heart represents our security, heart represents our passions, heart represents all that trust. And what's so interesting about what he says is Jesus actually says that you and I have the freedom and we have the choice to either open our hearts to God or close our hearts to God based upon what we do with money. And I've heard so many stories of this, and I've personally experienced this. It's like when our money comes, our way, and we open our hands, and it says, and basically say, God, like you have entrusted me with this, and God, I trust you, and what do you want me to do with this? It's almost like we open that door to God.
Yeah.
And it's an invitation for God to get involved in our hearts. And conversely, when we close our hands and we're like, this is all mine, it's all about me. It's almost like we close the door to our hearts to God. And it's like God is absent, God is abstract, God is distant. The church just wants my money. And it's really interesting. Jesus says we actually open or close that door based upon what we do with money. So again, you have conversations about money all the time. Have you run into that, or have you seen that dynamic played out?
You bet. I have literally in my role hundreds and hundreds of financial conversations with a variety of different economic situations. Some people that have really big piles, some people really small piles, some people with negative piles. And I will tell you, the number one thing that I see that is consistent across the board with the people who are the happiest and actually have the most peace around the topic of money are people that view their money through the lens of stewardship rather than ownership. And it's not that they're not ambitious to grow and develop and do really good with their money, but it's the lens that they're looking at, how they go about doing that is one of stewardship rather than ownership.
Right. I love how you said that whole stewardship, ownership, because stewardship means I'm accountable. Stewardship is like what you do. I mean, you're stewarding people's money, and you're going to have to be accountable.
Right.
They'll call you on the phone.
They do ask questions.
Yeah, they do. Versus this idea of ownership. It's all mine. I'm just going to, keep it to myself. And Jesus plays that dynamic out. I just think that's a fascinating thing that we can kind of open or close our hearts based upon what we do with our money.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's turn the corner a little bit. And I'm just curious, because you consult with people all the time and have lots of conversations. So I know, when it comes to money, there's a full spectrum. I mean, people are starting out, and then people, have a lot of it. And so what's your typical advice, or as you kind of walk through those seasons, what are some practical things you would say to actually help us experience a fresh start financially?
Yeah, I think there's some true common denominators. And I think to best understand it, it's good to have a grid of where people might find themselves, what condition they might find themselves in throughout life. And really, I think there's three conditions. And in the way of thinking about this, we think about that financial health is a lot like physical health. It's not a place you arrive at. It's a condition that you continually pursue. And when it comes to the three conditions that you might find yourself in, they are surviving, you could be stable, or you could be thriving. So the way to think about that and the way we language that with the people we communicate with is all centered around this idea of rich, where are they at relative to rich when it comes to their financial condition? And by the way, what we mean by rich is where are they at in creating more than they consume? Where are they at? And so what happens is the majority of the world, I mean, this kind of looks like a pyramid of those three things. By population, majority of the world are surviving. And they're surviving because they're consuming as much or more than they create. Now, many people, just with the size of crowd we have tuned in, you might find yourself there, that you're consuming as much or more than you create. The next spot is stability. And those folks, they are meeting the definition of rich. They're creating more than they consume. The big difference is they are still dependent on their human capital, being engaged in the marketplace for a return if they're going to continue to
In
create
other
more
words,
than
you're
consume.
saying they got a job.
They got to
They're
have
working.
a job. They got to keep working.
Yeah. Okay.
You don't work, you don't eat, right?
That's right.
And that's a smaller subset, the people who have kind of mastered at least the capacity to create more than is being consumed. And then the last category is the smallest of all. And these are folks that they're in a place where they're creating more than they consume, but they are no longer required to invest their human capital in the marketplace for a return to do so.
Right.
In other words, they've built enough economic value outside of themselves and structured their assets and income in such a way that it's bigger than the way they've structured their outgo.
Right. And I think that's where most people want to get to. I think that's kind of the dream, is to go,
Yeah.
man, I'd love to get there.
I mean, that is the pinnacle of financial health. Okay. Now, none of that, though, is a position of permanence. Because you can, with a handful of decisions and actions, relocate yourself on that pyramid one way or another. And I've seen it happen multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
And it is interesting, though, while it is an indication of financial health, it's not always an indication of financial peace. And that's been one of the most surprising dynamics, as I told you, when I was growing up and looking at both sides of that, how financial peace many, many times was absent from those that were thriving. But it didn't have to be. You can have both, and that's really the point of a lot of what we're discussing here today.
Yeah.
The common denominator of everybody in that little pyramid, no matter where you find yourself today, is they all are going to run out of ideas and run out of money before they run out of time and money before they run out of all their ideas and opportunities.
Right.
They
Yeah.
will, hands down. And the reason for that is because all of us have something that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about. We've got a gap between where we are and where we want to be. In fact, several weeks ago, I spoke about the gap at length, and just as a refresher, or if you didn't get to tune in, we have this gap between where we are and where we want to be that is never fully and finally satisfied. Because as soon as we accomplish and get to the next level, there's another level of better. And we were built, I believe, by the hand of God to make things better, to make today better than it was yesterday, and then tomorrow better than it is today. And while that can certainly be taken to all kinds of really unhealthy extremes, I think in its purest form, it's a really good thing. It's where progress comes from. Stewardship is all about creating better. And the thing with it, though, that we have to understand is that no matter how much money you have, no matter how much you accomplish, how far down the road you get, there's always going to be a next level of better.
Yeah.
And it puts us in a weird position, because if we don't understand that in light of that, we're going to run out of time and money before we run out of all our ideas and opportunities. If we don't understand that, we will live inconsistent with that reality, and we will try and outrun or out-earn all our gap.
Right. Which just puts us in that surviving,
It does.
place.
It
Yeah.
does. And it continues okay, what's next? Or even if you have a lot of money, there's always another level. And if you're not careful, if you're looking to get to the other side of your gap to find your position of peace, it's never going to happen, because you can have peace, you can have contentment where you are on your way to where you're going, but there's always going to be another on your way to where you're going. And so what happens if we don't recognize that, and I just see this, Buck, in my conversations with people over and over again, and I'm subject to it just as much, and I talk about it all the time,
Right.
is it's just really easy to try to get to everything, and in my effort to get to everything I can, I fail. And oftentimes, I find myself pursuing the things that scream the loudest, not necessarily the things that ultimately matter most.
Yeah, and I think that's for everybody. I think, I mean, I can so relate with that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and where that lands is that because this reality exists, there is a way forward, though. And I think that way forward is not to just be frustrated with the fact we're always in this gap, but one, enjoy where you are on your way to where you're going. But here's the thing. You better know where you are and where you're going. The two fundamentals, no matter where you find yourself, if you're wanting not only financial health, but financial peace, that you have to start with, I believe, after observing a lot of lives in this spot, is you got to know your location and you got to know your destination.
That's good.
And regularly check in on that. And it's I mean, we talk about this quite a bit, but it's a lot like if you're physically lost. Beck, have you ever been physically lost?
Too many times.
Too many times.
Yeah.
If we're physically lost, particularly like in a public place.
Yeah. Or at a mall.
Yeah, a mall, museum,
Yeah.
wherever. and you find yourself lost, you don't know where you are, you don't know how to get where you want to go, what do you go around looking for?
Yeah, some sort of like a map or, some sort of like stationary point, something.
Yeah, a directory, a map, something that preferably has one of those little red dots on it.
Oh, yeah.
That has those 3 really precious words to a lost person.
You are here, baby.
You are here. That's right. And,
Yeah.
and fundamentally, the reason we seek that out when we're physically lost is we know something instinctively. We can't get where we want to go until we first understand where we are relative to where we're trying to go. And a directory does those 2 things. Well, financially, you can't get where you want to go until you first understand where you are relative to where you're trying to go. So like this first point is, do you know where you're located?
Yeah.
What's your location?
And I mean, to boil it down, if I'm hearing you right, I mean, that's basically keeping a budget.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, hey, I don't, like for Jill and I, that's a weekly thing we do. For others, it may be, but it's the art or the discipline of just going, hey, here's what I'm spending. I put it on some sort of piece of paper and keep a budget.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to know where your money's going, because if you don't, it's going to be really difficult to make any kind of informed decision about the path forward to get where you want to end up.
Right, and that's good. I love that. Now, and I know when it comes to budget, I mean, I don't know about you, Wes, but for me, like, it's like, should I go to the dentist or do my budget? Because I hate it. In fact, like 4 days ago, I was doing the budget and I was like, and number crunching and all the details. I mean, that just drives me bonkers. But I'm telling you, if I don't do a budget, and I just do it on a spreadsheet, so I'm kind of simple. I know there's like Quicken has a budget. I know Financial Peace. Dave Ramsey has a budget called like Every Dollar. There's lots of tools, but mine is just on a spreadsheet. But if I don't do it, man, give it a week, give it a month, give it 2 months. Like, I start to feel that tension. I start to feel lost. All of a sudden, I'm like, where'd all our money go?
Right.
And I love that first point. So to like experience a fresh start financially, you would say number 1, regardless where you're at, you got to keep a budget.
That's right. And I mean, again, just to break it down real simplistically, like it's like if you want to get in good physical health, you got to eat right and you got to exercise. And I don't know, have you ever downloaded one of those apps that you have to input what you eat all day?
Yeah,
and
like
it tracks your calories?
740 of them. Yeah,
that's
of
right.
course.
That's right. I only do it once a year because that's the only time I actually track calories.
Yeah.
But you know what's amazing? When I do it, I pull it up and I put it in there and I'm watching throughout the day, and I'm going, I only have so many left. And it's amazing the difference in the decisions I make.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Understanding where you are. Even pretend for a second you didn't really know where you totally wanted to go.
Right.
Understanding where you are informs your behavior.
Yeah.
It does. It puts perimeters around your behavior. You will make better decisions and live with fewer regrets if the only thing you did was have a good you are here from a financial standpoint. So location, absolutely imperative.
So what would you say would be the second thing? I know you mentioned so knowing where you are, and then you talked about the destination. What does that mean?
Absolutely. So the other side is what does robust financial health look like for you? What does it look like tomorrow? What does it look like in a year? What does it look like 3 years from today? Really putting yourself in that place. If things went well in my life, in the story of my life around money, what does my life look like financially 3 years from today? Because if you haven't defined that, it's going to be really difficult not to sacrifice what you want ultimately for what you can have immediately.
Yeah.
Because if what I want ultimately is a nice padded retirement account, but I forget about that and I see what I can have immediately, which is the Harley, right? That I want so bad.
Sure.
I will easily do that. But if I keep reminding myself in light of knowing where I am and then saying, and I want to get there, it informs what do I need to do about it?
I love that.
And checking in on a regular basis.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is keep a budget. As disciplined as that's going to require you to be, it's imperative to do that.
Absolutely.
And then here's my financial goals, and to have those at like a visible place that are reminders to think about. Here's what I'm thinking about. Here's where I want to go.
Because it's a condition you're pursuing.
Right.
That's
okay.
what it is.
That makes sense. So when it comes to money, is there anything else that you would just advise or just encourage us to do?
Yeah, I would. I'd provide a little more specific direction that I've seen really take the game of financial management and financial peace from a place of ownership to that stewardship lens that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And that's in how we spend money, because by default, what typically happens is we consume first on me, right? Then if there's any left over, then I save some so that's on me later, right?
Sure.
I can have that. And then if there's anything left over, that's the goodness of my heart, or there's a hurricane or something on television that I come to give to, I may give a little bit left, but there's generally never any left.
Yeah.
And what I've seen turn people from owners to stewards and really experience not only great financial health, but also that place of peace when it comes to finance is when they flip the script. They flip that default setting and they really look at it from a lens of giving first, saving second, and then whatever's left I can spend on me.
Yeah.
And the fascinating part of this is that it truly does invite our Heavenly Father into our game.
Right.
You know, it's the only thing that separates. It's really easy for me to convince people that it's a good idea to save money. And because, you know, most people, one day they want work to be optional. So to do that, they know that they better have a little bit.
Yeah.
And the toughest part, though, is giving sometimes, like, it's a direct paradox to that. Like it's direct opposition to that. And when it actually helps us view the rest of our money, it has a ripple effect throughout it so much differently that I've just seen dramatically turn things around in the lives of people when they add that first component of giving, then saving, then living.
I love that. And that requires a lot of trust. I mean, I think one of those things to go like, gosh, you know, if I'm going to flip the script and I'm going to give first and say, God, I trust you, or if you're not a God follower, it's like, hey, I'm going to give first because I want to make the world a better place. You've seen that, and you've seen that practically work out in people's life, but that requires trust. Yeah. So talk about that a little bit.
I've got a ton of good giving stories. Like I could tell you a million, because there is, in my opinion, something magical that takes place from a stewardship perspective in just how you begin to change your lens of viewing everything else, not just where you're giving your money, but everything else when you begin to give, and when you begin to give out of a heart towards wanting to be in contact with your Heavenly Father. Because He invites us to this throughout His entire word, invites us over and over again. And the other thing that comes along with this are the blessings that are associated with giving. Not just that it does good, and it does do good, but God takes an active role in making sure that super things happen inside of your life that just there's no other explanation for. And while I could tell you 100 different giving stories, I do want to take the time just to tell one, because I think it's so relevant to kind of getting some people over the hump on this, because I get it. I know that this is a tension, and it is one of the hardest steps to take, but I want it for you, and your Heavenly Father wants it for you. And so I just want to, maybe this will help get you over the edge, a real life story here. About 15 years ago, so we were in private practice for about 3 years by this point, I had an assistant that was leaving, and they were leaving on a Friday, and I had a new person that was going to start that Monday. Really good, well qualified. Well, that Friday afternoon, I got a call, and the person who was coming to work for me told me, hey, I'm so sorry, Wes, I can't come, and here's why. And I totally understood, but now I was going to kind of be in a bind, you know. So we, Jamie and I had chosen to take a little staycation that weekend, so we went to a little local hotel here.
Love that. And
I woke up, and I was just kind of thinking and praying and journaling and really just trying to ask God for wisdom on this. And this doesn't always happen. I'm going to tell you, it's not happened very often in my life, but I wrote something that it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I wrote, just a thought came to my head, hire Brian's assistant.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hire Brian's assistant. And the interesting thing was, I did know a guy named Brian.
Yeah.
I did not know anything about his assistant, and I didn't imagine I was supposed to go steal her, right? So I thought, well, maybe that was the pizza. I don't know.
And so you're sitting there in the hotel room, this thought, did you write it down?
Wrote it down. Wrote it in my journal, and
Okay.
then kind of looked at it and didn't know what to do with it. I kind of dismissed it, honestly, after that. And then I went to work that Monday. And I went in my office, had another friend of mine that stopped by, said, hey, where's your new person? I said, well, here's what happened. And the first thing he said was, have you thought about hiring Brian's assistant? I said, interestingly, as of Saturday, I have.
Wow.
And it turns out she needed full-time work. And Brian couldn't provide that for her. So he said, hey, my blessing, go look for work. And she had a couple offers on the table, and she was getting ready to make a decision on those two offers. And I got to meet her. We hit it off. We agreed to what I would pay her. She was very excited about what I said the role paid. And she went to work for me, and she's been with me but now going on 15 years and has been a huge blessing to me and to our organization. And it was so neat how that transpired. But Paul Harvey would tell you, I didn't know the rest of the story yet.
Wow.
And the rest of the story, years later, emerged as I was talking to her about this. Because what was happening to her, the reason she needed full-time work, her name is Stephanie, by the way. She was needing full-time work because she had just gone through a divorce, and she was a single mom, and she was looking at the bills in order to stay in her current present condition. And the money just wasn't there. And so she got these two offers, and they were better, and it was more full-time work. But that Saturday morning, she was sitting at her kitchen table, and she was looking at the bills, and she was looking at the money and looking at the bills, looking at the money, and she would have just enough to be able to make barely all those bills into her future with this new money, as long as she did not tithe. And she had honestly never tithed before in her life. But she had been going to church and she'd been learning about God and learning about money and trusting in him and wanted to take that next step of faith. But when she looked at it, she just didn't see how it was going to work out practically. And she's looking at bills, looking at the money. And then she said, I just looked up. And when I did, I just said, I'm going to do it. And she wrote that tithe check right there in the midst of such uncertain conditions.
Wow.
And then across town, a guy she'd never met, who'd never met her, wrote the words, hire Brian's assistant.
That's amazing.
Today, she makes many times more than what she made with me, and she's a blessing to our organization. And I often think about, and we talk about it all the time, what hung in the balance of deciding to choose just that one time, to do something different one time that she'd done 1,000 times a different way.
Right.
And how rewarding God was to her in honoring that faith in what was going to come next.
That's so cool. That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
And the fact that you got to be part of that.
Yeah, it was so cool.
And you work with her today.
Still today,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That is awesome, man. And I've heard so many stories like that to where, it's just that idea to go, okay, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to move to be a steward of those finances, which really does require trust.
Absolutely.
And so, again, thank you for sharing that. Well, Wes, just thanks again for being here and just loving and leading and serving in this way. And really appreciate that.
Glad to be here. Bud.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, guys, listen, for all of us, when it comes to experiencing a fresh start financially, I love what Wes was giving us insight into. And for you this week, it may look like just simply keeping a budget. And guys, I'm with you. I know that requires discipline and I know that's tough, but it's so important to begin to know where you're at. Or maybe for you, it's not the budget piece. Maybe it's just those long-term goals to give you some financial direction and financial motivation, and just writing those down and keep them in a really memorable spot. Or perhaps it's simply flipping the script and saying, you know what, when it comes to my money, I'm going to ask the question, God, why have you given this? And what do you want me to do with it? And then give, save, live. And when we do that, I'm telling you, it is just an open door to our hearts for God to get involved in our finances and God to get involved in our lives, perhaps in a new and refreshing way. Whatever it is, this week, I want you to take a step and experience that financial freedom and experience a financial fresh start. Again, Wes, thanks so much for being here. Let me go ahead and just pray for us. Father, thank you so much for loving us, and thank you so much for talking about just real life stuff. And money's real life, and it's in all of our lives. And Father, I just pray with the conversation we've had today that you just give us insight, that you give us direction, and that you give us the courage to do something different, do something new, and take a step and experience what you have for us. God, thank you again for Wes. Thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
What kind did you get?
I got vanilla. What'd you get?
Chocolate cookie dough.
What'd you say?
Chocolate chip cookie dough.
Cookie dough? I couldn't hear that.
Dude, this is so good.
Fantastic, man. Scoop Score's the best. It's the best in town.
Support local. Do you think it's bad we're eating ice cream at like 7 o'clock in the morning?
No, man. Time is relative.